identity. You know what I'm saying? All these different things, man. You know what I'm saying? It's very important to key in and pay attention to those type of things, man. You know what I mean? So our guest just came on. You know what I mean? So we're going to go to him now, and we're going to get into the discussion of the show and the interview. Brother Adika Butler, peace. What's going on, brother? It's nice to have you on.
Peace. How you doing, man? Glad to be in.
Peace. What's the deal, brother? Just for starters, you know what I mean? Am I saying it right? It's Adika Butler or Adiki? How you say that? How do I say it properly?
It's Adika Butler. You got it right.
All right, got you, brother. All right, now tell the people a little bit about yourself. Tell them always a little bit about yourself. You know what I mean? Just so they'll get a good understanding of who we're talking to tonight.
Oh yeah, no doubt. Well, I'm the person behind Mindglow Media, which is Third Eye Max blog at this time. I have other plans to expand the imprint, so to speak, but people may be familiar with me through that particular blog, thirdeyemax.net, and my background is pretty much in journalism. I'm an award-winning writer, New York Association of Black Journalists. I won, some awards back in college, even going back to elementary school. So writing is really, a passion of mine. It's one of my passions, I should say. So, I pretty much, no doubt.
Just had to give you a hand clap for that, you know what I'm saying?
No doubt. So I pretty much, came up in what we would call a conscious, household. Like my parents were very progressive in their thinking. I came out of a Rastafarian household. Both my parents are Jamaican, but they were not dogmatic in their approach and their thinking and their way of looking at that particular school of thought. Even though I grew up, constantly surrounded with images of Marcus Garvey, Haile Selassie, so forth, so on. I really grew up with a lot of reggae music. You know what I mean? My dad was a bass guitar player. He had his own band called the Singers and Players of Instruments. Worked with some legendary artists. Back in the day, but didn't really go full throttle with the band. But, I was exposed to the teachings of, the Nation of Islam, particularly as it was, taught under the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. I was also exposed to the history of the Moors. And, that was something I remember specifically, my dad driving me to school and, he would, tell me stories about, the Moors in Spain, the Moors in Sicily, and so forth and so on. And I used to always say, as a little kid, man, these guys sound really exciting, you know what I mean? And I always was, curious about them. But when I started reading on my own, taking in more history, because although, I grew up, within that background was where I was exposed to history and culture, when you're in your early teens and everything, you start drifting away from certain things that you were taught, and you get more immersed in popular culture, hip hop, fashion, all that type of stuff. So, but in my late teens, I became more curious about a lot of the things that I was taught about, learned about in my youth, and I started going to bookstores on my own, buying books, going to the library. Back then, and we're talking about the late 90s. The internet, was not what it was now. I mean, a lot of people didn't even have access to the internet, like people do now. I didn't even know how to use the internet back in 1998. You know what I mean?
Right.
That was something that was foreign for me. All I knew was the bookstore and the library, and if I wasn't getting it through there, the information through there, then I wasn't getting it. I didn't know about no lecture circuit. I hadn't, discovered Phil Valentine and Bobby Hemmett at that point in my journey, and, other prominent lecturers, who, many of your listeners may be familiar with. So I was, just doing a lot of reading, and then I came across books on the Moorish legacy, and it really just inspired me. It gave me a new, fresh perspective on what it means to be, a black man in Western civilization. And it gave me a frame of reference where I looked upon people who looked just like me as the actual architects of what we would call Western civilization. So that was a very pivotal point, in my development when I really immersed myself in those studies. But just to give, more background on myself, like I'm a founding member of a publication known as Where It's At. It's based in the greater New York area. We've also distributed in other states, neighboring states like Rhode Island, Philadelphia, New Jersey. We've been in different parts of New York. And, the magazine paper was started back in 2003. And, we focused a lot on, like dancehall, reggae, entertainment. So, like, most of the people that you can think of, who have been prominent in, like the dancehall, reggae scene, I or, some of my writers, have, done interviews with them, Beanie Man, Elephant Man, Sean Paul, Shaggy. I mean, the only person that, off the top of my head, I think we never got a chance to interview was Vibes Cartel, but most of those people, we gave like a platform to, like promote, their work, their albums, because, in a lot of the black urban entertainment genres, whether it be the internet or print magazines back in the day, back in the early 2000s, mid-2000s, they would cover dancehall and reggae, but there wasn't something where they were like consistently giving a platform for these artists to like promote their albums, promote their new music. So we stepped in, we fulfilled that role, and we developed a relationship with the artists, with their labels, and, things were very prominent. But, me, myself personally, although like I'm a founder, like I kind of, have pulled out from that scene over the last, I would really say like maybe a year or two. And, I've been focused as far as like my writing is concerned on, like producing books and, my blogs. And those blogs and those free ebooks that I've put out, over the last 2 years or so. And my next book, which will be a retail book, that's coming soon this year. I would have probably put it out last year, but, there was some, like drastic changes, that life throws at you sometimes. Like my mom transitioned back in February of last year. So,
sorry to hear that.
Yeah, no doubt, man. So that was something that kind of like, derailed my plans, so to speak. But I'm very proud to say that it also offered me new insights into the subject matter that I write about so often, the nature of the spirit, the spirit world, and how spirit communicates with, the quote-unquote living, and everything that entails. So here I am now.
Let me ask you a question in regards to that, not to cut your wisdom, but just so we can, just so we could get into some particulars, and that's what attracted me to your blog. You know what I'm saying? The thirdeyemax.net. Y'all make sure y'all check his blog out. That's thirdeyemax.net. Very, very, very good writing, very, very good data, very good information, period, on that website. And I reached out to you, and I'm glad that you agreed to come on the show. And so from your knowledge of these aspects, what can you say just briefly on how that energy and those aspects play into the current geopolitical and socioeconomic paradigm of today?
The geopolitical and socioeconomic paradigm, well, I mean, I feel like it, pretty much goes without saying that if you're a person who's dealing with, spirit, then you're a person who's engaging in observation. Observation is very critical. It's very important. just noticing the subtleties and those things that we would call, ironic, those things that we would think is a coincidence. Learning to look at these things, learning to understand these things, and apply them to your day-to-day life is something that is very critical. We make decisions on a day-to-day basis, dealing with, our finances, dealing with our political, allegiances, and so forth and so on. So I think that when you're a person who is engaging in a certain level of observation, it provides you, if you're, dealing with spirituality on a high end and not just reading about it, but practicing certain things and rituals that reinforce a certain pattern of thought, a certain kind of psychology. All of these things help you in several aspects of your life, even in ways that you may not be able to enumerate and list. But it's really like a holistic benefit, so to speak.
Definitely. No, I love that answer because I was just talking about being an observer and what that meant quantum physically. The
and
observer.
being a good decision maker,
Absolutely. And it's those subtleties and nuances, to me, make the difference in all of the observations when you see what you said, those things that are ironic, the nuances, the subtleties. That's, to me, some of the most heaviest and profound aspects of dealing with spirit. But definitely appreciate you sharing your thoughts on that. Now, when I first set up the show, I had put occultist, and you asked me to change it to life scientist, and you said that this could be something that, you wanted to clarify on the show. And I just wanted to ask you, could you clarify on that? What's the difference, and why you prefer the former rather than the latter?
Yeah, that's a very good question, bro. I would say, off the top that, being and I don't really see anything wrong with the title occultist. I think that there are many people who I admire and respect who use that label, so to speak. I mean, Pascal Beverly Randolph is one of them, and he's somebody who has influenced me a great deal. But when I look at myself and who I am and what I do, I don't feel like that title quite encompasses what I feel like I'm trying to, reach at this point. And the reason why I say that is because when I look at that word, occultist, the prefix "oc" being hidden, cult being a reference to culture. So the occult is essentially a hidden culture. But I feel as though when you look at what people might call certain esoteric spiritual practices as a hidden culture, you create a divide between yourself and that thing. So you kind of find yourself in a situation where you're constantly accumulating more and more information, more and more raw data, and your head is expanding. You know all of this shit, but on some level it's like you're not really making the advancements in your day-to-day life and your day-to-day experience that you would like to make, like you envisioned yourself, like becoming this like guy with superhero powers and shit, but you find yourself as a donkey pretty much chasing a carrot. So I just prefer to use the term like life scientist, because the way I understand it and the way I look at things is like, this is my life. And as a scientist, you're pretty much practicing the discipline of observation. And a scientist is a technician who artfully uses, their observation and the scientific method, which is, coming up with a perspective on something, testing it out, and then based upon the results, you determine whether or not it's true for you or not. And if other people might be interested in hearing about, what perspectives you have, you can share that with them. And, that can be something that, is mutually appreciated and mutually enjoyed. But, it's not, something where you're necessarily out to dogmatically convert people to your frame of thought and your way of thinking. So I look at myself as a life scientist, a person who is living their life, and they are experimenting and finding new ways to experience, the beauty that life has to offer. And those things are the things that fill us up, fill us out, and just, bring us closer to what it is that we're seeking. All of that hidden knowledge, all of that secret wisdom that, we read about in books, it becomes a real living aspect of our day-to-day lives. And, that's
I think that's a brilliant answer, brother. Very brilliant answer. And there's two things that you said that intrigues me, and that's because I often use these terms in a certain way as well. And you said perspective, and there's another term you said. You said but perspective. Oh, and raw data. See, a lot of people they gather data. They gather information. They never act on this information. They never apply this information, and that's because they lack perspective. See, you can only gain perspective from giving a thorough observation. You see, because once you thoroughly observe certain aspects of things, and then you can formulate a perspective, the perspectives gives you the ability to apply the raw data in the ways in which you deem best for yourself.
Definitely, definitely. You custom tailor it for yourself. Yeah, so it becomes a living thing, living information.
Absolutely. And what's interesting, too, about what you said earlier is that when you started to study the Moors at a young age, it transformed, especially for you growing up in the West, it transformed your being somewhat to realizing a certain level of potential that you had. And I was just touching on that before you actually came on the show, that it wasn't until I started to really dig into the history of Moors, not this modern stuff, not the modern conjecture that a lot of people espouse to, but the real history of these group of people called the Moors. When you dig into what they actually did, what they studied, what they learned, what they ate, how they did things, you end up actually studying world history, and you realize how much of the modern world is filled with what's the word I'm looking for? Filled with the gifts that the Moors brought it. You know what I mean? From all aspects of life. And I think that's very critical and important for my audience or for people that's going to listen to understand, because you have to have an open mind and when you're researching this, because it'll give you insight to a lot of the machinations that are taking place in our current society. So with that, I want to ask you this question: can you, not necessarily a question, but can you begin, if you're ready, to discuss some of the things that you wanted to discuss in terms of the contributions of the Moors, and whatever ways that you want to share that with us? Hello? I think the brother may have.
Hello,
there,
can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Mm-hmm.
All right, perfect. Yeah, I was saying that it's funny that you asked me that, because a few weeks ago I was looking at a book, and you may even be familiar with the book. It's a fictional novel, so to speak, and it was written by a brother by the name of Justin Thomas. It's called
Did you repeat the name of that book?
The name of the book is A Company of Moors. And it was written by
I'm familiar with that. Right. Yeah, very familiar with that book.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very good writer. I mean, if people are not, familiar with his work, he wrote A Company of Moors. He wrote another book I think it's called The Ghost of Gabriel's Horn. and he has several other books. But you know, at one point when I was somewhat, you know, like interested in, you know, like getting into the whole lecture circuit. This was back in like 2004. I was approached by, you know, like a good friend of mine by the name of Brother Shabazz, and he's actually the guy responsible for, you know, like a lot of those, you know, lectures people see, those classic lectures that people see on YouTube, you know, featuring, you know, like Phil Valentine, Bobby Hemmett, you know, like, you know, back in their heyday. So, you know, he was like talking to me about, like, you know, like coming out there and, you know, like engaging, you know, with the people in that realm. And one of the people that I was inspired by was Justin Thomas, you know, who went by the name, I think, Tefiru Azar, you know, and, you know, very talented writer. And he has this fictional novel called A Company of Moors. And there's a point pretty much near the beginning of it where one of the characters in the book pretty much has this monologue where he's going through all of the contributions that the Moors brought to Europe. And, you know, if you'd like, I would, you know, read a passage from that book to you, because I feel like it, in so many ways, like captures, you know, like what you were asking about in terms of their importance and relevance.
Please do. Definitely.
So, yeah, this is from chapter 2 from the book A Company of Moors, and the character whose name I don't have, you know, like in my notes or anything here, but, you know, pretty much what he says is, all we did for Spain, for Europe, was provide light to its dark ages and halt its degeneration back into barbarism. They who deliberately turned away from the lessons of their highest cultures, the Greeks and the Romans, would be taught again by those who represented the descendants of those cultures' teachers. Zeryab, that man like a bird with black plumage, his color no different, single-handedly educated this world to music, botany, chemistry, table edict, and the aspect of fashion and seasonal dress. That was within the first 100 years of our 700-year reign, when the greatest of the white European nobles were illiterate and living in a barn. We birthed palaces and libraries carrying hundreds of thousands of books and sought knowledge rather than gold or land. We built the finest public baths when Europe looked upon cleanliness as a sin. We established drains when Europe was throwing its waste into the street. And by the way, the high-heel shoe was based upon people trying to separate themselves from the filth and the garbage that was in the streets of Europe at the time. I'm not sure if a lot of people are aware about that, but, you know, I'm going to continue with the quote. There were suburbs to our cities, there were districts, there were towering structures that surrounded great universities built for study of the finest arts and the greatest of sciences. We preserved the precise mathematics of the ancients, expounded upon their sciences and the philosophical tenets of spirituality. We even extended the gifts of freedom. Women walked as doctors, lawyers, and soldiers. The Jew and the Christian were free to worship, and crime on the street could barely find shadows for comfort. Ironically, we presented civilization like a tribute, as if Europe was the god and we its humble subjects. Perhaps then Europe was the embodiment of that black Phoenician princess of mythology, of whose name she so proudly continues to bear, Europa. All praises to the mother goddess, Isis, Enaya, Oyayanza, Kalia, Al-Uzza, Kore, Alat. Praise even to your names unspoken and to your threefold manat. Continue to anoint us with your oil, your Petra, as you raise your true African descendants. We Moors, like a disgraced single mother, your husband has been tricked into service by the pale religions and nations that have left a hulking scar on humanity's soul. You are invisible to him now. A Holy Ghost beheaded like Medusa by the Greeks, they who so jealously committed that heinous act to that beautiful negress goddess. We have been robbed of our medicine. I curse her cancer, her now blanched population. Let they remain as barren and recessive as the moon. Yeah, so that quote right there for me was like really powerful, and it really captures, the spirit of what they offered. Like so oftentimes, our people, they find themselves in this Western world, and, a lot of times we romanticize about Kemet. We romanticize about these ancient civilizations that seem to bear no direct reference to the civilization that we dwell in today. But I feel that if we recognize the fact that we are, in fact, the architects of the current civilization that we dwell in, with its skyscrapers, with its computers, with its marketplaces of convenience, with its theaters, with its, stores of high fashion, if we look at ourselves as the architects of all of this, then that has a great impact on what we're able to create, moving forward,
Absolutely. I think a couple of things real quick. That was real good. Some real good. That was a real good monologue in that book right there. But one thing that is very, very interesting that I don't know how this had missed me throughout all my research, and I've always known it, but I didn't know it I didn't realize. You know how you can know something, but you don't realize it? I didn't realize it.
Definitely.
You just read it, that Europe that was a Phoenician name. It's a Phoenician name for Phoenician word. That is profound right there. Specifically because on this show and a lot of the other literature that we put out through America Society, we've touched on the Phoenicians heavily. And in fact, the woman who was, I think they call her Helen of Troy, the woman who was the whole Troy situation went down about. Her real name in history is actually Makita. It was a Moorish Phoenician woman. Very interesting. But, yeah, Europe, a very, very key component there. And also just to touch on what you said as far as how people disassociate themselves with this particular portion of history and gravitate towards the Kemite portion is very interesting. It's a book I read. I can't remember the name of it. It's an old book too, but it talks about Atlantis. Now, whether Atlantis was real or not is not the point I'm trying to make. It's just that they said that the closest civilization that came, the civilization that came the closest to being a visual representation of Atlantis was Moorish Spain. You know what I mean?
No doubt, no question.
And what's interesting of what you read in that quote as well is the portion about how he says they let the Christians and the Jews practice their religion in peace. Now, there was and the scientist Neil deGrasse, he did an entire lecture on this, and he talks about the turning point in which Islam actually began to turn away from science and be more dogmatic. And I know the Moors were very keen to not recognizing the Ottoman Caliphate as having jurisdiction over them in particular because they said they didn't have the jurisdiction. But this is a key element. The prime minister, the president of Malaysia, and he said this in like 2009, 2012, I believe, but they took it down off the net. I can't find the speech nowhere. But he said the world of Islam needs to return to the way the Moors dealt with it in the golden age of Spain, as opposed to when the Turks got it, they turned it and trivialized it. Now, I just say all of that to say that a lot of people get certain aspects of the Moors confused, and they really don't understand that they were dealing with higher principles and not dogma in relation to spreading this peace and this high culture, because that's really what they were spreading, high culture, you know what I mean, throughout the world. And that's what you have to do when you're civilizing folks. So I just think that was overall some great dialogue. I just wanted to throw those 2 cents in there. But continue, please, you know what I mean, and some of the things you wanted to share with us.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, like the point that you just made, I think is extremely critical because, you know, to my recollection, I don't think that there's too many people who've, like, highlighted what you've just pointed out. And that is and what it really gets to the heart to is the fact that, you know, Islam in the hands of West Africans is different from Islam as it would have been practiced by the pale Arabs of Arabia or the Ottoman Turks that you made reference to.
Absolutely.
And I think the reason why that is because as tradition, African spirituality going back to ancient Kemet, and, as many people may not even be aware, like there's a wealth of rich spiritual cultures throughout West Africa. Like, a lot of people are familiar with the Orisha of Nigeria, but there's more to African spirituality than, Ifa and ancient Kemet. There are like so many different traditions, but the unifying thread that connects them all is the emphasis on what? Science. And they did not make a distinction between their science and their spirituality, because their spirituality was based on science. So when these Africans went into Europe with Islam and Christianity and what we would label today as Judaism, they were using these, what we would call religions, as like political tools. Not to say that they didn't believe in Yahweh, Allah, or Jesus Christ.
But it's a great point you bring that up, and I say it all the time. With the modern perspective that religion is something other than politics was created during the 1500s with the Treaty of Westphalia, where they created the concept of secularism. To the ancient world, your religion was your politics. For instance, if one group of people went to war with another group of people, another tribe or nation of people, they would say, whoever won would say, our gods beat your gods. So this was the ancient understanding. They didn't compartmentalize. You said a key word earlier. You said it's holistically looking at it. See, and this is the holistic perspective is what has been lost because people compartmentalize these things. So yes, I would. Historically, they're one and the same. So yes, there was a political system, and just a key point to touch on. Dr. Ben, in an interview, says that the Moors took the Yoruba system into Europe. He says that they took the Yoruba system into Europe.
Definitely, and just to piggyback off of that particular point that you made, if you look at, I can't recall right now what they are actually called. I don't want to say Veve because that's more dealing with the voodoo tradition, although they're very similar. But if you look at the sigils that are used in connection with the various Orisha, you realize that it doesn't look that much different from the so-called goetic seals that you have in Western occultism. For example, if you look at, there was a movie put out by a Nigerian filmmaker by the name of, I think his name is Nosa Igbeneton. I can't remember his exact last name. If he ever comes across this podcast, please forgive me for butchering the name. But he made a remarkable film, and it's remarkable because it casts a actual deity from African tradition as a superhero. And I'm referring to the film Oya and the Rise of the Orishas. And if you look at the sigil that's used in connection with that film, it very much looks similar to what you would call the goetic seals. So when you look at Western occultism, you're pretty much talking about the remixed rehashings that African Moors went into Europe with. Europeans got a hold of it, and they remixed it. It's pretty much like, Jamaicans creating what we know as dancehall reggae, and then, people from the Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, or whatever having, whatever have you, rhyming in Spanish and then saying, well, this is reggaeton, but they rhyming over dancehall beats.
Right.
But that's the same thing that the Europeans did with African spirituality. They called it Rosicrucianism. They called it the Lesser Key of Solomon, the Goetic Seals. But if you're really dealing with African spirituality, you don't need to mess with any of that shit because, and I don't mean to call it shit, but I kind of do mean to call it shit. You know what I mean? Because all of those elements are already in our own traditions. So we don't really need to mess with that stuff because that's somebody taking your culture and remixing it, you know, you'd be better off taking your own culture and remixing that yourself,
right?
Rather than, you know,
right.
like take what the European gives us, because, you know, it took me like a number of years before I realized that, you know, all of these books on Western esotericism, Hermeticism, Rosicrucianism, they all have value. You can gather great pearls of wisdom from the literature and a lot of the concepts, but when you get to a certain point of understanding, you realize that a lot of these people are speculating and they don't really know what the fuck they're talking about. They really don't. They really don't. So I feel as though that's something that's critical to point out. But as far as, you know, like religion being politics, some people might say, well, you know, religion is, you know, like something that is, you know, like outmoded and it's never had any real value. Like, that's not a mature perspective on things because, for example, if I'm coming from Ghana and you're from, we'll just say China, and we're conducting trade, there's a lot of things that you and I may share in common in terms of our culture, but there's a lot of things that make us different. However, if you're a Muslim and I'm a Muslim, that gives us a way of connecting with each other on a cross-cultural level. So that strengthens the economic relationships that we have between each other. You understand? So people should never, like, overlook the value of religion in that aspect. And even in some of my blogs, like, I kind of go in on institutionalized dogmatic religion, but it has its place, you know what I mean? And it has value if it's looked at in its proper context.
You know what's interesting about what you say is I did a show with a brother named Lumumba Ali El, and he took a trip to West Africa to Sierra Leone. He just got made a chief out there too, Prince. They say it again.
Yeah, and I was saying I heard that program. It was very enlightening.
Oh, okay, great. You see, and he said the same thing you just said. He said it that the chief told him that's how they perceive it. You see what I'm saying? That it's a way for them to do business with the rest of the world. And I think what the reason a lot of people make that mistake is because they allow their mentality to fall victim to the dogma of the religion. And what I found too is that when the reason the religion served that purpose, period, because all religions have these occultic, mystical, or unspoken of aspects, mystical aspects of it. And you'll find that in every religion, and that's where you actually will find the heart and soul of what the religions are and were about. But as cultures came into contact with each other, they just couldn't let all of the secrets from one culture pass to another because this was big stuff back then. Some were family traditions. Like, for instance, I was talking to one of my people that I build with on certain stuff, and he was telling me how the voodoo deities come from the homie, but they're from a specific woman who it seemed like she just had pretty much took some ancestral spirits. You know, she introduced some new spirits to their system. You see what I'm saying? And so you have a lot of different nuances and things going on, but the thing that connects everybody is those larger rituals, larger systems, and larger programs that can unite the world. Now, I was talking to another brother who's a priest and he's an occultist, and he was saying that he believes in Atlantis. I'm not here to say if it exists or not. I'm just giving context. He says that after it fell, Kemet became the place where the technology was at, and that we were supposed to move there. Everything was about getting back to the one world system. You know what I mean? And connecting everything based on that. And that's why there's so much similarities in a lot of the cultures, a lot of the philosophies, a lot of these different things are that way, because that was the culture of the planet that every system was working to get back to. But I just wanted to say that. I'll digress. I want you to continue, please.
Oh yeah, no doubt, man. And me personally, like, maybe I might have mentioned it once or twice in my older writings, but I kind of like don't really get too much into the Atlantis thing myself. But I do think that there is a basis for its existence. I think in ancient Mesoamerica they talked about Absalom, which
right.
is like not far from that region, and then. Back in 2001, just a few days before the September 11th attacks, they found some stone structures, pyramidal structures, I think even. Probably not large, but they were pyramidal structures nonetheless. And they had what appeared to be Phoenician script written on them, and they were found underwater off the coast of Cuba. So, there's something there. But
and just to add on to that point, and we can keep moving. Just to add on to that piece, there's a book by Jean-Pierre Hallet. It's called The Pygmy Kitzaboo, and it's pretty much showing these pygmy people from out the Congo. They got stories so identical to the Garden of Eden, but it wasn't influenced by Islam, Christianity, and Judaism because they had never reached them that far. But the story is identical. But I bring them up to say this point. They even speak of a time where there was a super technological age in society, and it collapsed. And they said it caused more problems than it caused more harm than good. So that's why they never tried to return to that way of life. They try to keep it simple. But yeah, in general, you dig far enough, you're going to find out about, different older ages and different things like that. But definitely, we can continue. I just try to point out certain things.
I'm loving the interjections that you're bringing in here because, like, it highlights and illuminates some real key things. That book you just mentioned, I got that book and I've read that book, and it really does go. Yeah, it really does go into that whole Garden of Eden myth. As a matter of fact, they talk about the tree of knowledge and wisdom. They called it the Tahu tree, and it's the tree of wisdom. And I read that, and I was like, "Yo, I think that they got the name of the Kemetic god Tahuti from this pygmy story." I really think that because when you even like go back to ancient Kemet, they had like a certain level of reverence for these, little people. You know what I mean? You have the deity Bes, whose reverence, like goes back before, like even dynastic times. So I think that there's a lot of significance to that particular story, and it really highlights the fact that when we're looking at Kemet and different parts of African culture, it's very important that we look at the continent as a whole because there's some rich stories, man, and like it's very important that we even travel. Like I'm looking to travel, to the continent, like soon myself and really build with some real people because there's a lot of shit dealing with African spirituality that's not even on the internet. You know what I mean? My lady is in an African tradition, and the tradition, deals with, like names of deities, and you can't find none of these, deities on the internet. You can't even find a spiritual system on the internet. Somebody has to tap you on the shoulder and bring you in, So there's a lot of information on the web, but there's a lot that isn't even out there, and I think
that kind of feeds into what I was saying.
To people.
That kind of feeds in what I was saying about the fact that these systems, a lot of systems and traditions, were family based, and in a lot of the priesthood traditions, it has to be passed down. So so you're not even going to hear about some of the other, entities, energies, and all these different things unless you were actually in the tradition, in the family. You see what I'm saying? So that's how much, and the religion serves that purpose for that realm. But there's a realm that the religion don't cover, which is the aspects of the family traditions in which these sciences were passed down. The knowledge of these elements and these energies are passed down, and they're so closely guarded. And that's one of the things that the brother on that Lumumba Ali was pointing out as well, that the chief was telling them, you know what I mean, about that's why I had to call it a magical trip to West Africa, because when he was telling me the story, man, it sounded like I was reading a book of Water and Spirit. I know you had that.
Yeah. It's funny. Like, people be surprised. Like, I didn't actually read that book. I mean, it's like a must read. You know what I mean? I just never got it. But I am familiar with Malidoma Some's work, and I've read like some of his other books. But yeah, it's within that vein, or even Credo Mutar's in Daba Macho, stuff like that.
Definitely.
But I mean, even what you were saying about like the information being passed down, it's not even just the information that they're passing down. They pass down spirits through the blood. You know what I mean? So, for example, like you have in different European-based secret societies, secret orders, if you disclose certain secrets, like there's penalties that, potentially might come with that. You know what I mean? You might be ostracized. You might be punished. I mean, these are just stories that are handed down to us through the literature. But the whole basis for even those concepts is the fact that, in African-based spirituality, it's not people that's necessarily going to, deal with you if you transgress certain agreements, certain contractual agreements. It's actual spirits. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So that was the whole basis of like that aspect of like the European secret societies and secret orders, where they might punish, like a particular member for disclosing secrets, but in Africa it's more like the spirits deal with you. You know what I mean? Because you made a contractual agreement to not, disclose certain things which are taboo.
Right.
Yeah,
one day we're gonna have to have a conversation offline. Now that I know you're on that level, there's some things I gotta talk to you about, brother. We just gotta have that conversation offline.
I'm here.
But moving along, I remember you brought up to me that you wanted to touch on a lot of some of the cuisine aspects and fashion aspects of the contribution of the Moors, things that people take for granted daily, not realizing that it actually derived from the Moors.
Oh yeah, definitely. A lot of times, like we talk about the scientific, technological ingenuity, in ancient black achievement overall, and that's very well understood. For centuries, particularly in America, we were taught that our people are intellectually, mentally inferior, so our great historic scholars and learned men went back into the archives, went back into the records to show our people and demonstrate to our people that we do, in fact, have a history of achievement in the sciences and, and different realms that require a certain level of intellectual acumen. And all of that knowledge has its place. I think that, that information is out there and we need to continue to build on that. But we need to also recognize the fact that there's just like really basic things that we enjoy on a day-to-day basis that impacted the Western world that we were also responsible for. Like whether you like a person who's super conscious and the square root of the sun and what have you, or you just a person who just wanna sit around in front of the computer and look at porn all day and sports. We all enjoy food. You know what I mean? Food is something that we enjoy. And a lot of the context for which, we who live in America have for food, where we have access to foods from a broad variety of regions, that was something that the Moors introduced to Europe, where they brought foods from different parts of the world and introduced it to the European populace. That is the forerunner to what we have today, where you can go into Manhattan and you can go to a Moroccan restaurant. Then you can go down the block and find a Thai restaurant to eat food from Thailand. Then you can go, hop on the train and, go a few blocks down further and find a Senegalese restaurant, a German restaurant, a French restaurant. Like that type of culture where you have this eclectic access is Moorish, you know. They brought so much to Europe. They brought things that were used in the Middle East, you know, which is, you know, really an extension of Africa. They brought things that were, you know, in the Americas, you know, like I think what is it, you know, like the cacao, you know, that's used in the chocolate. That was something
right.
Europe. Just to like, you know, like highlight some foods that they introduced. You have you know, like fried fish, you know, like frying fish in coating it in flour and then frying it.
Wow.
That's something that the Moors brought to southern Europe, and it expanded out to different parts of Europe.
Now, just real quick, if I could just interject real quick. Now, which one of us? Now, my family's from the South. Now, I can't eat fish because I'm allergic to seafood, but who doesn't have a family who don't fry fish? I've never known that was introduced by the Moors with the flour and all that. So, and then I found out that chicken
now, don't
is
get me wrong. I'm not saying that the
too.
Moors invented that, but they brought that to Europe.
Okay,
they were doing that in Africa.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Definitely.
There you go. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, they was doing that in Africa. So it's like, you know, what we do today, you know, like they were doing a lot of that, you know, like back then, like introducing rice, cinnamon, saffron, coriander, cumin, almonds, lemonade, dried fruits for desserts. The Moors introduced sugar to Europe, and back then it was called, they called it sugar, but they would also call it crack. And
they would call it crack?
It was called crack. Like sugar was called crack. Like they would say, you know, like crack's of sugar, but they would also just call it crack. That's where the name crack comes from, because they would cook basically like you basically take caramel and then you cook it to a certain temperature, might be like 300 degrees or more, and it starts to crystallize and becomes like a translucent, rock-solid substance. You cook it. So that's where that whole basis comes from. When they started calling it crack, they had a historical reference for the term. I mean, if you think about it, why would you call cooked cocaine that becomes a rock, why would you call it crack? There's no logical reason for you to call it crack. You call it crack because they used to call it crack in the Middle Ages. They used to call something that resembled the crack rock in Middle Ages, because in the medieval period, they didn't have granulated sugar. It was in rock forms, like little rocks, you know, and you would like crack it and break it up in your food and, you know, disperse the granules that way, you know. So, you know, there's a little something for, you know,
and
people who, you know, may not have been aware.
They were selling their children. Ivan Van Sertima said in his book, Golden Age of the Moors, that they were selling their children and all family members for the sugar that the Moors was bringing up. So it's funny, you know, that the reaction,
I see why they call it crack. Yeah, the aristocracy, you know. The common people didn't really have access to it like that, but, you know, like the aristocrats, you know, like, they were loving the sugar, you know what I mean? They loved it. And just getting back to, like, you know, other culinary things, there's a dish in Southern Europe. I think it's even popular in Spain and possibly some parts of Italy, called paella. And it's pretty much like spiced rice with seafood. Now, there is a African version of that same dish, and it's called chebajin, you know, which is rice with tomato sauce, you know, spiced rice, and, you know, they, you know, prepare it with fish. And, you know, the Senegalese, you know, were also up in Europe. So the fact that this dish paella is often attributed to the Moorish presence in Southern Europe, and the fact that you have Senegalese with a dish that's pretty much identical. And if you even do research, you know, chebajin, paella, you know, you'll find that they're very similar. You know, like they were, you know, these are African dishes that black people went up into Europe and they introduced, you know. So seafood is really prominent in those areas where the Moors visited. Southern Italy, Spain. There were also Moors in France. They were in, like places like Languedoc, Narbonne.
Right.
Just to get add a little bit more to like the whole cuisine thing. It's said that a lot of times when people think about European cuisine, they think about France and Italy in particular. But the French were taught high-end culinary techniques by the Italians, and that came through the marriage of I think it was Catherine de Medici. She married one of the French kings, and when she came from Italy to France, she brought a lot of chefs with her. And for those who don't know, Catherine is the sister of Alessandro de Medici, the Moor, who was the Duke of Florence. So go ahead.
Just want to add this piece. What's interesting about that is in the BC era, during the Punic era, is when Rome via Italy via Rome during the Punic era had gotten a lot of other culinary stuff from the Moors through that era too. And I distinctively had learned that a pasta was one of them, as well as a lot of other foods were introduced into Italy through the Moors via the Punic era. You know what I'm saying? And then there was another era in the I think it was about 900 A.D. Where the Moors had re-entered the Italian peninsula and invaded and brought some more culture and some more things there as well. So just wanted to add that in since you was bringing up the Medicis, and you're right, Alessandro. Yeah, anything spot on. Just wanted to add that in there. Please continue.
Yeah, definitely. And some people try to like hide, because when you're able to trace, like they call it haute cuisine, high-end French culinary, approach to food and everything. That's what they call it in France, and it was really codified where they started like really getting into writing the recipes down. That's something that is really an innovation. I mean, not to say that they weren't always doing it, but it really is an innovation of the French. And a lot of people try to hide the Moorish influence on French cuisine by saying, well, we don't really know that the Italians, particularly through Catherine de Medici, influenced French cuisine to the extent that they did, because there are no recipes from that era, from her era, that survive to this day. But what they conveniently overlook is that Italian cuisine is based upon what? An oral tradition, where the recipe is passed from mouth to ear. Very much like any African tradition. You know what I mean? If you talk to Italians, they'll tell you that that's their culture. They pass down different recipes, and one recipe, one dish might be prepared, a variety of different ways based upon the family who's passing down the recipe, because it's an oral tradition, So they, people try to hide that, like influence, but the Moors really brought a lot, chocolate. I'm not sure if they brought ice cream. I need to look into that further, but there's so many gifts that they brought. Just with culinary arts, and, I'm not saying that, these foods didn't exist. Clearly they did, but if Europe didn't have access to these wide variety of things, of foods, then the lifestyle that we have here in America, where we are exposed to a variety of different foods from different parts of the world, there may not have been a reference point for that as you had it back in Europe.
Absolutely. What about some of the fashion aspects? I remember you brought that up too. And this is what I try to point out to people a lot of times too. Like they try to turn the Moorish paradigm into it being exclusively about politics in law, and those are just components. and I won't say that there are necessary components or not main components, but the component that got the people to love them was the culture. Stuff like food, dressing. These were fly guys. You know, these dudes were fly.
Yeah, man. Yeah, man. Yeah, people, and I think one of the reasons, like even when you look at the conscious community, you know, there's a respect for the Moors. Then you have like a lot of people be like, oh, the Moors, you know, is black. The Moors like sold, you know, black people out. The Moors is just Muslims and they're just this. I think what happens is that one word Moor means different things to different people because you have different people at different levels of knowledge. So one of the things that I'll often hear people say, oh, the Moors were, you know, like black Muslims. That's inaccurate. There were several Moors who didn't have nothing to do with Islam. They were just dealing with the spiritual sciences coming out of Africa. There were some Moors who were dealing with more the Judaic approach to things. There were Moors who were Christian. And it's funny because, you know, when you talk about fashion, and I saw one of your videos on YouTube some years ago, and I was smiling when I was, like, watching it because you said something in there that I always felt, but I never heard nobody else say it. And you said that them Christian Moors was, like, swagged out with it when it came to the fashion.
Yeah, no, they weren't. I think it's the Illuminati bloodline. If it wasn't for the Christian Moors, if it wasn't for the Christian Moors, we would not know what swag is, man. Like, we would not know the greatness of the Moors in Europe because the Muslim branch was against, you know, pictures and stuff like that. The Christian Moors was the portraits, wearing all that gold, wearing all them the furs and stuff like that.
I mean, Alessandro de Medici, you know, he used to walk around with, you know, like a fur cape made out of wolfskin. You know what I mean? Like just some real like, high-end fashion. You know what I mean? And it's I mean, Zaryab, you know, the dancer. He was a dancer, botanist. You know, he spoke multiple languages, I believe. Like those guys, man, they really was, you know, like bringing that fashion aspect, you know, and that's something that we as black people, you know, we love fly clothes, and I think that they kind of like, you know, represent that, you know, on a lot of different levels.
No, that's absolute fact. That's an absolute fact. In fact, the word luxury was created by the Moors in the 13th century because
I didn't know.
That was
No, I'm saying I didn't know that.
Yeah, I was doing some research into the Moorish harems. Now, what's interesting is if you check out a show called Vikings, right? Come on the History Channel. 2 episodes ago, they had the Vikings coming to Cordoba, right? And the first thing they do is they hear the dance or Floki. He goes and they go to the masjid. Then they go to the harems. And they take some women with them that they leave out there from the harems with. But what shocked the Vikings was the quality of food. They started eating the food that was on the stands that they had out in the marketplace, and just and then they saw how some of they just saw the finery of the Moors, and in fact, I just brought that show up just to highlight it. But one of the interesting things is too gators. I've seen pictures with Mullah Ismail wearing gators.
It really looks like gators, and it's funny because I later saw this in Hidden Colors, the first one. They talked about, like, it's funny because I used to work in this in Tribeca, Manhattan, New York City, and there was this store around like I'm just giving names, but you know, for people in New York who like have like a frame of reference, but you know, people who are outside of New York, you know, just bear with me. You know, there's like this store around like Chambers Street called Moorish. And it's spelled Mauri. And I used to always look at that. This is like around 2008. I used to look at that and be like, yo, like you know, they got gators in the window. they got like all of these like nice suits, and it was an Italian-owned venue. And I was like, I think there's like some Moorish connection to that right there. But I never really looked further into it and did any research into it. It was just something that I just saw every day. I made a mental note of it, and I just kept it moving. So when I saw that in Hidden Color, them talk about Maury, the Gators, and that whole like spirit, like it kind of like brought that home to me. So I got tuned into Maury Gators from listening to Cameron, because the rapper Cameron would always bring up he wearing Maury Gators. And one day I was out in the city. This is like 2004 or 5. And one day I'm out in the city. I think was it in Harlem or one of them places? And I saw Maury. I said, "Oh, this is what he's talking about." But it's Italian, and you got to think about it. There's no gators in Europe. There aren't alligators in Europe. They're in Africa. And crocodiles and alligators is in Africa. I mean,
you know
what I'm saying? We don't think about these things. You know what I mean? There's a lot of things that we don't think about, like all of these European royal families. Like you look at a lot of their shields of heraldry, and they got lions in them. They don't got no lions in Europe. So why are they putting lions in their coat of arms? Is because the people that they descend from come from a land where there are lions.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying?
I give you a quote.
I mean, these little things we don't think about, but they're right in our faces. And that goes back to what I was saying before, observation. Yeah, go ahead.
This is a quote from Ancient and Modern Britons, and I got to give a honors to Kafera L for posting this. It says, the Danes then were like the Moors, black like them too. They were Picts, as more than one eminent writer has proved. The title of Grom, Woad stained, is not confined to highland genealogies. It was the actual name of a grim old pagan Dane who ruled over Denmark. And that's from David McRitchie's book, Ancient and Modern Britons, on page 121. And that just shows, that this validates and corroborates what you just said, that a lot of these, European royal families descend from the Moors, and that's actually the basis that I did my YouTube video on, the introduction, the Stolen Legacy of the Moors, Illuminati Bloodline Stolen Legacy of the Moors, that goes into that. And so that's just to corroborate what you were saying, because the Danes are a group of quote-unquote Vikings who, overtook England, you know what I mean? But in David McRitchie's book, he just says that they're black like the Moors. They were, they were Moors. That's what he was saying. So you're absolutely right. Like even the word Halliburton, you know how you got Dick Cheney got the company Halliburton. Halliburton, the family crest for the Halliburton is a Moorish woman on it.
There you go. And I mean, all of that is there, and like the in marrying in between all of these different royal families. You do your research, you find that all of these far-flung European royal families, Austria, England, all of these people are related.
Yep.
They're all related,
yep.
And they all, even Italy, they're all related, and the reason why is because they want to keep certain spirits that they are carrying with them in their family. Because if they go outside of the family, then that is going to have an effect on their blood. So where did they learn that? They learned that from Africans and the spiritual traditions that we brought from Africa into Europe. Like, one of the things that we don't want to even come to grips with as a people is that a lot of the negative qualities that we associate with Europeans in terms of being very, when we talk about, like certain Europeans, we say, they're arrogant, they have this, air that they feel that they're superior or what have you, they're very cocky, you think about this English, Renaissance man, so to speak, and he has his nose up in the air, he's walking around like, his shit don't stink. Like, who you think they learned that from? Like, we talk about, they didn't have knowledge, they didn't bathe, they didn't know how to do that, and then all of a sudden, like, they have this culture where they think they're hot shit. Who you think they learned that from? You go to Africa, as far as, like, stories that I've been told from people who've visited, and just knowing, a lot of Africans. That's how I've come to a lot of my understanding with regards to how Africans deal with quote unquote religion, as opposed to how some people live in even the Caribbean, or especially African Americans might deal with it. Is that I've been around them. You know what I mean? And they think very highly of themselves, and in a lot of ways they might even be very classist.
Right.
So they've learned a lot from us. Good and quote unquote bad.
Absolutely. One of the things that's interesting about you bringing that up, which in the modern era you see the same thing taking place. There was Jimmy Iovine. Jimmy Iovine is quoted. He says, if it wasn't already obvious, Jimmy Iovine noted that he is a big fan of African-American culture and added, African-American culture is one of the most undervalued assets America has, even with this nonsense America is going through.
Good, yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So so it shows that wherever we are at, the culture we naturally produce, as we've shown, it's already tied into, to the Moors, but it's just it's repeating. So scientists always say, if you want to show that something has happened, you got to show that it's happening today. So this is how we know. You know what I mean? The same people, same situation, same. Even when you look at pop culture of today, we brothers and sisters pretty much run pop culture. You know what I'm saying? That's a fact.
Yeah, man. I mean, me, I'm of Jamaican descent. My parents are Jamaican. I'm very proud of my lineage, my history, my culture. But I mean, there's no denying the fact that African Americans, blacks, from America, North America in particular, are very unique and very special. You know what I mean? No matter what part of the world you go into, there are, black people from America specifically who have influenced the globe, whether it be a Malcolm X, a Tupac, a Michael Jordan, a Kobe. I mean, you can go on and talk about people in different facets, walks of life. And that's something that needs to be acknowledged. You know what I mean? That, very special people here in America, and I think that we lose sight of that. I think it's very important, if for no other reason, to study history so that you are aware and you're cognizant of what you've done and what you've accomplished, or rather, not what you've done and accomplished, but your ancestors, people who came before you, and that gives you a frame of reference for what you can do and what you can be. You know what I mean? I think that if we were more aware of our history, dealing with, the Moors, dealing with a myriad of other things, we would value ourselves so much more and not sell ourselves short. Like a lot of people want to demonize people for quote unquote cooning, but let's look at each other as a loving brother and sister. What causes a person to coon? They're selling themselves short. They feel that they got to do certain things to thrive and strive and survive. So the question is not about shaming them and making fun of them. I mean, we all do it. We all crack jokes and stuff, but it's really about looking at, okay, what makes them do what they're doing, and how do I make sure that the people within my circumference understand their worth and their value? Because it's really people not knowing what they're worth. How are you going to clown somebody and make fun of somebody for not knowing what they're worth?
And it's also a group issue. A group issue is also the people not valuing. See, when a group, because I've studied group dynamics thoroughly, and when a group appreciates members of that group, the members of that group are less likely to seek validation outside of the group. You see? So the internal group is very poor at validating and recognizing one another's values. This is what is the root. in many cases of people cooning or going outside to seek approval outside the group because the group doesn't validate its own members.
Yeah. Real.
Absolutely.
Reality, man.
We got
That's why it's so important that we promote. We promote each other as, like, it's important that we promote each other as brothers, sisters, what have you. Like, you see a brother doing something, it don't matter whether you know the brother or not. You know, I don't know that nigga, so I'm gonna promote his shit. Nah.
Right.
Promote it, man.
Exactly.
Promote it. You know, you see a sister doing something positive, promote it. You know, we need to promote each other. And I think if we have that as a fundamental aspect of our culture where we recognize each other's words, then we can, you know, cut down on, you know, this quote-unquote like cooning. But what does that all come back to? It comes back to recognizing our own worth. Because you can't recognize my worth if you don't recognize your own, you know?
Absolutely. I want to get, we got 5 minutes in the official show. We're gonna carry a little bit over after the hour. If you're listening, you have a comment or question, or if you're on the line, press 1. If you want to call in and you're listening, the number is 319-527-6213. I got this is my brother Elamir, usually on, but I guess you're getting on late. Elamir, what's the deal, brother? What's going on?
Assalamu alaikum. Just in there catching all the bars. You know, I heard you was hearing all them bars. Yeah. I heard that piece about the sugar, and I think it was Stanley Lane Poole, Moors in Spain book that I got to look it back up to be sure, but he I think he's the reference that also said that when the sugar was brought into Andalus or Spain or whatever, that it operated just like cocaine. So when I heard that, you know, the breakdown on crack, you know, that was thorough.
that was deep, brother, right there, brother. Like, you're gonna have a hood on fire with that one.
And when they, you know, Onika's book, Black Moors, Africans in Tudor England, their present status and origins, he discussed a lot about Catherine. He talked about, you know, the Moorish women in her entourage, and how, you know, they pretty much was the ones designing the outfits, weaving the silk, you know, things of that nature. It's pretty much, you know, influencing the culture in England when, you know, Catherine came through.
In France, you mean? In France, yeah. But you also...
No. Oh, you was talking about a Catherine in France. I'm talking about the one who married Henry. Aragon. Catherine of Aragon. That's the one I'm talking about.
Okay, Catherine. Okay, he was talking about Catherine Medici. You know what I mean? The one that's in Reign. Now, you know also King James. You sent that link to me. You sent that link to me before, too, that the King James actually had made, custom made, and gave as gifts 9 crowns to 9 Moorish women. You know what I'm saying? King James, the one who translated the Bible. So that's interesting in of itself too, showing the influence on the culture. Yeah, and Onika suggests or gives references rather that the women, the Moorish women in Catherine's entourage were essentially the descendants of Moorish aristocratic families that was in Spain at the time that Ferdinand and Isabella, you know, end up winning the battle, and they, you know, their status dropped from being aristocratic to being aristocratic employees, basically in service to the nobility. Interesting. So before we got 2 minutes in the official show. What I want to do is, Brother Adika, I want you to let the people know how they can contact you, get more information from you, how can they support you, et cetera, et cetera. Oh yeah, no doubt. I can,
my work can be accessed through thirdeyeMax.net. You could even just Google Mongo Media. That's my blog. I have like several pieces on there that, each piece is, usually pretty long, pretty in-depth, and I explore a wide variety of concepts pertaining to ancient history, the spiritual sciences, not just as it relates to, our topic of discussion this evening, but, just a wide variety of things, and people and personages and history, and I think it's a valuable resource. That's what I'm told, at least. So, I think, people would, get a lot of value by checking that out. I'm also on social media. I'm on Instagram, Twitter. I'm more on Facebook. People can find me on Facebook. My email address is adikabutler@yahoo.com. People can reach out, to me. I'm here.
Indeed. Well, I want to definitely give you an honors for coming on the show. We got a lot of people listening. A lot of people don't have any questions. I guess they were just listening. But I want to, again, thank you for coming on and sharing this much-needed information with us, because it gives a different perspective and a different understanding on a lot of things. And, brother, you're always welcome. Anytime you want to come on the show, we actually